Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Latrecchiano, and I hope you're all doing well. It looks as if we've had a lot of good work being done over the weekend. It's Monday today, and I want to provide you both sort of a midweek update on what's going on in this session 2, and then also prepare you as we move into session 3. So today's video will serve as your sort of prep for moving into session 3 as well as commentary on session 2. So as you can see on my screen, I'm looking at the wiki that you've all been working on. This is terrific work. There are really 3 goals here that I have for you to do this activity together. One is it gives you an opportunity to create sort of a reference page to go to. So even if you didn't, in your team, didn't spend as much time working on one particular theoretical perspective and you were assigned maybe another one, you could take what Poole and colleagues have put together and sort of refer to this sheet. I particularly like the places where the team members have put sort of an example problem or maybe even a study that someone's doing that might look through this particular lens to try to solve that problem. So the first one here is psychodynamics, has a great definition from Poole, gives us a little bit of information about how we would think about looking through this lens using psychodynamics. What we would do as far as understanding behaviors or trying to understand behaviors, what we're looking at that are psychodynamic, that'll help us understand what's going on within a group, and also about interaction and how this particular theoretical perspective views the world. Now, I know not everyone's done here, but if you haven't looked through the rest of the wiki, I think it gives you some really great reference points to go back to and remind yourself what some of these areas are all about. Of course, they're not all filled out yet because not all the groups are finished their work, but that's the first goal I want you to get out of this activity, is being able to have this sort of cheat sheet, this sort of reference page that you can go to. Secondly, what I want you to get out of this is to begin to understand that we can look through a lens at any particular problem. In this case, Marshall Poole and his colleagues put this together in ways to recommend or to draw insight into how we might look at teams and what's going on in teams. When we study teams, sometimes there's so many things going on, it's hard to sort of focus and really look at one particular piece of what's going on. I think you can see now that what the authors are providing here are typical lenses that might draw important insights to the way teams are working. So for instance, if we look at something like the functional lens, we can look at how the team operates, how it works, what is its function, and what is the functionality of all the people involved in it. That would be very different than looking at it, let's say, for instance, from the perspective of social identity. There we're not looking so much at how things work, but what the identity is of individuals, and also the team possibly as having a group identity. So as you can see, these different areas, and we could probably add even more, are just areas that help us sort of focus and realize that if we were to study teams, we could look through a particular lens that would help us answer certain types of questions. Lastly, my third goal here in having you do this is to prepare you for thinking about if we wanted to measure the functionality of a team, or maybe their social identity, or maybe even something like, let's use one of the other ones here, how they change over time, the evolution of a team, or their feminist or genderist or diversity, probably is the better word, within a team. how would we measure it? So far, we've talked about the idea of doing cross-disciplinary work, which is the goal of teaming, that we get diverse and different perspectives as part of knowledge-producing teams. Now, in this session, we were introduced to the idea that we can look at through particular lenses to ask certain questions about how teams work. And now, as we go into sessions 3 and 4, let me move to 3 here. You'll see that we're going to move to the idea of measurement and how we might measure certain things that are going on in teams. What I provided you here is a definition of what I and my colleagues call knowledge-producing teams, which are very particular types of teams. These are teams that do research, science, have goals that are scientific, and ultimately have goals that point to the creation or the development of knowledge. Now, that's not to say that other types of teams that are not research or science teams aren't teams. That's not it at all. But here in this course, we're talking specifically about those types of teams that play some sort of role in scientific and research enterprises. We call those knowledge-producing teams because ultimately they are contributing to some body of knowledge through their interactions with each other. Now, many in this course over the years I've found think also of care teams as fitting into this category, and they can fit into this category. However, not all care teams are designed intentionally to generate knowledge or to create knowledge. So they can, some can, but not all would. So as you're thinking about the team that you want to observe, and in this age of COVID, I realize you have to be a little creative. You can't just simply go to someone's meeting or go to their laboratory. It's a little more complicated these days. But think about a team that would fit this category of knowledge production. That part of the reason, or the whole reason, possibly, that they're together is to solve some problem, to generate some knowledge, and or to generate maybe even a product or some sort of intervention that is going to inform the problem. This is where even care teams that are developing some therapy or some intervention are actually providing knowledge. And that's one case where a care team would be a knowledge producing team. In other cases, you may be looking more towards people who are on multiple contributions from, sorry about that, that are providing multiple contributions from different parts of the translational spectrum. They might be multiphasical, whatever. But think about this definition as we provided it here and how that might guide you in choosing the type of team that you are interested in observing. Now, we are entering into, in session 3 and session 4, into sort of a 2-week session. So session 3 and session 4 obviously are 2-week time periods. And in addition to what you're doing in class, you're also preparing for residency weekend. So these are the weeks where really the first 2 weeks and the third and fourth weeks come together, and we're going to really synthesize when we get together during residency weekend. So just for a review, we talked about team science and what some of the goals of team science are and the science of team science in session 1. We talked about cross-disciplinarity and the role cross-disciplinarity plays in teaming in science. Then we've talked about these lenses in which we could look at teams and sort of focus in on what's going on in these teams. And then now we're moving to, in session 3 and 4, ways of measuring those teams and what's going on. So this is where everything starts to come together. So the reading I gave you for these 2 weeks, and keep in mind these are 2 weeks, are looking at some of the major, and there's just one example of each, but some of the major ways in which team science has typically tried to measure the effectiveness of teams. And these are the areas: bibliometrics, behavioral studies, stakeholder involvement or engagement, knowledge integration, knowledge transfer, and psychometrics. So just from looking over this list without a whole lot of knowledge of what's going to be in these articles, I think you could see some parallels to the types of lenses Poole is talking about. So you can probably very easily see how psychometric measurements, measurements that measure the inter or intrapersonal engagements or belief systems that individuals might have. That could be translated into things like social identity or individual identity. When we talk about knowledge integration, you can imagine how that could be used in a temporal way, looking through that lens in the measurement of how knowledge is integrated. We actually have a doctoral student in this program whose whole doctoral dissertation is about how knowledge gets integrated at the FDA. So these two areas that we've introduced you to, which is the different lenses to look through when you're considering what teams are doing and how effective they are, and now how we might measure those things. Now, some people, when they hear the word measurement, they often think of strict sort of things like rulers and metrics and things like that. Measurement we use in research to mean not just the measurement of those things that are metrical or those things that are predictable, but also the measurement of things that are more qualitative in nature, measuring the degree of attitude, measuring people's viewpoints, measuring someone's worldview. We use measurement to mean both qualitative and quantitative data collection. So in these weeks, 3 and 4, now we're moving to the idea of measuring teams, which should inform the way you're going to be looking at your proposed teams that you're going to want to observe in the upcoming assignment. So the session assignment is there's really 2 parts. Session 3 is read the examples from the readings that are there and consult with your instructor. Email us ideas or post ideas about the type of team, the team that you would like to observe, and we'll give you some feedback if we think it's a good connection. So please feel free to email Dr. Lee and I about your initial ideas for this activity in session 3. And by the end of session 4, which is really 2 weeks from now, come prepared at residency weekend with a 1-page overview of the team you have decided to observe and and how you hope to measure their effectiveness. This does not need to be sort of the final word on it. We're going to use this in an activity during residency weekend, and I ask you to review a Work It All 2019, the Repco and Stotek chapters that you've been reading so far, and the Poole article that you read to do this past week's work. Develop at least 3 possible perspectives you might use to look at your team, and we'll talk about them at residency weekend, and we'll see if we can inform better the way that you're preparing to look at your team. And maybe you might change your mind. Maybe you'll hear a little bit more from one of your other classmates. This is not a graded assignment at all. It's just something that we want you to come prepared with to residency weekend. So these sessions 3 and 4 sort of slow things down a bit. There's not quite as much reading to do per week, but it's really more about bringing these different um, uh, uh, subjects that we've been talking about together in your preparation for residency weekend. As always, we try to remind you where you should be in your assignment to preparation. By this week, weeks 3 and 4, you should be looking ahead and thinking about what it is you want to learn from the team you're planning to observe. And the assignment I just talked about is going to help you sort of get there. As you select from the series of measurement techniques that you're reading about in sessions 3 and 4. And then lastly, this is completely optional, but I highly recommend it. The team science community is a very interdisciplinary community. So we have literature that appears in all different kinds of places. There is no quintessential team science journal. There are journals, of course, that publish on team science. But because team science comes from a very broad cross-sectoral group of scholars, we have a Mendeley site that's specifically dedicated to the literature that comes out of the team science community. It's free to be part of, and I think it's going to be really helpful for you as you look for literature, either to augment the reading in this course, or maybe in your work in the future as you prepare to do your own research. But you just go to the Mendeley site and you ask for permission, and you'll be granted permission, and you'll have access to a much more cold group of literature that appears in all sorts of journals. I would always recommend, if you're doing anything in team science, to start there, because this is the literature that the community has actually chosen to pull together, making research in team science all the easier. So I hope you're doing well with your work. I know it's a super busy time. You're trying to launch all of your courses, and you have a considerable amount of work to do. I'm fully aware of that. I just want to remind you that when we go into sessions 3, 4, and 5, there is no formal discussion assignment, but rather we leave the discussion open so that if you have questions and so forth about your reading, your assignment, you can bring it up. Also, of course, if you want to post what you are planning to do or hope to do with your team observation assignment, you could post it there. Maybe others could even chime in and give their input. Otherwise, you can write directly to Dr. Lee and I, and we'll give you our advice on if we think it's a good opportunity to take advantage of. I hope you have a great week. I hope you continue to do good work like you did this past weekend. It's a great start. Even though everyone's not done, you're going to have a really handy, easy to go to synthesis of that particular reading, which is going to help you as we move forward. Okay, thank you again, and have a great rest of the week. Bye-bye.